Purdue was one of the most dominant teams in the country throughout the entire season. Spent a bunch of time at number one with good reason. You see how the first 38 games of the year played out for the Boilers. Offensive efficiency amongst the best in America. The three-point field goal attempts per game and the percentage was a big part of the reason that they enhanced their productivity versus last year. The rebound margin was really surprising last night. We knew UConn was an excellent rebounding team, but Purdue had been exceptional on the boards throughout much of the season. They were out-rebounded last night. It felt like that was a big factor in the game last night. Now let's go out to Glendale with Dave Refson and see what their thoughts were coming out of the game.
Here in Glendale, Arizona, Dave Refson, Mike Sikorsky, and Robbie Hummel after watching UConn take down Purdue 75-60 in the national championship game as the Boilermakers fall one win short of what would have been their first ever national championship. Guys, interested in your takeaways on this game. Robbie, I can start with you. What did you see as the difference?
Well, it was clear the game plan for UConn was we're going to let Edey play one-on-one and we're going to shut everybody else off. And a lot of teams have said they're going to do that, but not many teams have been able to actually implement that. And the game plan, high-level stuff by Dan Hurley, the 50-50 plays, some of the issues Purdue had on the defensive glass certainly showed through. And then I think the biggest thing, yes, Edey got his points, Braden Smith had his moments, but Lance Jones, Fletcher Lawyer, those guys were taken away by UConn. Their size in the backcourt, certainly Tristan Newton, Cam Spencer, that's a lot to deal with on both ends. And the guards for UConn were just better tonight.
I thought really Purdue, with everything that they tried to do, it just couldn't quite get it done. With all the pressure they were getting on the perimeter, they were able to get to the lane, but I don't think they were decisive enough when they arrived. When they got to the rim, they weren't emphatic enough. When they got deep, they weren't able to locate shooters or often enough on occasions to get the ball to Zach in dangerous positions. That was really, for me, what was decisive, especially in the first half, when they were getting to the lane pretty comfortably, in part because of how they were being played, but also because they were being aggressive. But once they got in there, they just weren't decisive enough, and I thought that was a problem.
And again, a brilliant game plan for UConn, but it's one thing to have a brilliant game plan. It's another to implement it. They held Purdue to season lows in points, three-pointers made, and three-pointers attempted. That was kind of your point, Robbie. I just thought they did a wonderful job of saying kind of, hey, look, we're not going to get beaten by the three-point ball. Remember, Purdue's second in the nation in three-point percentage coming into this game. Just, again, I mean, even if they had hit more than half of them.
Well, they kind of did that to Alabama as well.
Yeah.
We thought the Crimson Tide might try to shoot 45 or 53s. They took 23 or 24. They made a lot. They made a lot more than Purdue did, but they limited their output as well. And give a lot of credit to the scouting report and certainly the way that those guys went out there and handled their business, because that's high-level stuff, and no one else has been able to do that to Purdue all year long.
Zach Edey, 37 points. He ends up with 177 points in this NCAA tournament. It ties him with the former U.S. Senator Bill Bradley for the second most all-time. Only Glenn Rice, the amazing national championship run for Michigan back in 1989, has had more in an NCAA tournament. He was fabulous, not only in this tournament, but in his entire career. I mean, one of the more memorable players we have ever covered in the Big Ten.
I have absolutely treasured watching him and covering him in person and when I'm in the studio. He is such a phenomenal player, and to watch his growth as a player, to watch him build his game, to watch him build his body and his stamina, to become more dynamic as a player. So many elements over and over again. And that's one of the things I've always loved about covering college basketball, is watching players improve over time. We don't get quite as much of that now in the era of coming into college, maybe playing 1-2 years, going to the NBA draft. But we saw him come from number 436 in his class to number one, and one of the greatest players in the history of the Big Ten, certainly the greatest player in the history of Purdue, and one of the greatest players in the history of college basketball.
And he puts up another massive number here tonight. I'll always remember the Tennessee game because you've got two first-team All-Americans who are just going at each other. And the way that Dalton Knecht was playing and the shot making, and Edey had an answer every time. The block at the end of that game to send Purdue to their first Final Four since 1980. He's a special player, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he can do as a pro. People doubted him in high school. People are doubting him right now. Man, he's been productive. He works on his game, it's going to be fascinating to see what he is as an NBA player, and time will tell. And that's the cool part about his story, because that's yet to be written, but he has all the tools.
And you mentioned first Final Four since 1980. It was the first national championship game for Purdue since 1969. They won their 26th Big Ten title, adding to their record for the most all time. So many incredible memories generated by this team. What stands out as you try to put this season into some sort of perspective?
Yeah, for me, what stands out is Detroit, being in the building, watching how emotional some people got about them winning. How
Anyone in particular?
Who's over there?
How Zach Edey just would not be denied in that game. The Lance Jones three-pointer. There were so many key plays down that stretch. Everyone in that building knew what was at stake. Two teams that had really wanted that. Purdue hadn't been there since '80. Tennessee had never been there. They were terrific teams, and they really wanted to be here. And I watched Purdue absolutely say they wouldn't be denied. I'll never not be impressed by that.
Yeah, I'll always think of just the long game. So many teams, players, coaches could be broken by a loss like the FDU loss, and then to come back and just work harder all summer and get after it in the fall. And then every time that they were challenged here in the season, they answered that call. I'll always think about the run, because it could have went south. You could have something like that and it doesn't work out. The pressure to make the Final Four was so immense. If they lose in that Elite Eight game to Tennessee, so many people, including Purdue fans, would say, well, what a failure of a year, which is sad, because they had a great season even without that game. But that game will always be remembered, and I just think for Purdue, the long game of, even with the failure, they were able to bounce back and have a very successful year.
Something Matt Painter said to me in the locker room immediately after the game. He said, I want that to be the narrative of this team, is the way that they bounced back, the way that they stuck together, the way that they set a goal and accomplished it. They obviously had a goal tonight they fell a little bit short of, but an amazing, amazing run by this group, and one that generated incredible memories for their legions of fans who showed up here in Arizona. That's going to do it for us for now from Glendale. Let's send it back to Anthony in Chicago.
Thanks, Dave. One of the highest scoring individual outputs we've ever seen in an NCAA championship game last night by Zach Edey. Those 37 points led the way for Purdue, led the way for the game, and especially the strong start, the emphatic start that Zach Edey got off to last night. Really impressive. Of course, not enough to get Purdue over the hump to come out with the win, but we wondered what that matchup would end up being, Trent Meacham, especially on the interior. Klingon and Edey, and we figured, all right, probably advantage Zach Edey, but would it be enough of an advantage to get Purdue over the hump? It proved not to be last night, but just schematically, strategically, going to Edey as much as they did, I did wonder about that throughout the game. Even in the second half, as the scoring margin began to increase a little bit, I did wonder, were things a bit too Edey heavy? And I don't know if he ever can be, but that was in my mind.
Well, I think there's no doubt Edey needed some more help, and he didn't really get that. Braden Smith, 12 points, 8 assists, 9 of those points were in the first half. But beyond those guys, only 11 points total from Purdue, 1 for 7 from the three. This is a team that's made over 8 threes a game. You got to have some bounce. I don't mind them going to Edey like they did. You got to 37 points, 15 for 25 from the field. You can't ask for more from Zach Edey. There was a stretch in that game, I believe the last 5 minutes or so of the first half, first 5 minutes of the second half, where Zach Edey didn't score. And that's where UConn really got that separation. And that's the point in time, too, where, especially the first half, UConn was in some foul trouble. Both Donovan Clegan, Samson Johnson. Yeah. And what I would have hoped is maybe Purdue could have even doubled down on really going to the post in that moment, and they just weren't able to. I thought Trey Coffin-Wren, another guy, early post-up bucket. He had an advantage on the inside, but didn't really get much going beyond that. They also didn't, Anthony, take advantage of the foul trouble. They got to the free throw line 15 times. That's not quite what they typically do. And they were in the bonus for about 20 minutes of gameplay and just weren't able to capitalize on that. If they could have done that, and then you got to make some threes as well. But UConn, their defense was fantastic, so you got to give them a ton of credit.
There's no doubt about that. It felt like, especially the early stretch of the game, I couldn't help, especially just with it all encompassed in basically a weekend, where it felt to me a little bit like the women's national championship game, where Caitlin Clark got off to this record-setting first quarter start for the Iowa Hawkeyes, 18 points there. And then, things sort of plateaued plateaued throughout the rest of the game. Zach Edey was so good and so energetic early. Things plateaued a little bit, and it seemed like Purdue didn't necessarily have a counter punch. Was there anything you felt like they could have done to be able to create more opportunities? Braden Smith had a few moments in the game, it seemed.
That's a great comparison because both Iowa women's, Purdue men's had the best player on the court, but the next 4 best players were probably from South Carolina women's and UConn men. But to answer your question, Anthony, I think Purdue just really struggled getting separation. All their guards and UConn's, look, top to bottom, everybody is an elite defender individually. They don't get into rotations. They don't have to help. They're in great position to rebound. They won the rebounding battle as well. Purdue needed to get more separation, whether that's on off-ball screens or on-ball screens. But, Stephen Castle blanketed Braden Smith for 94 feet, and Smith had a few things going. He was able to get to the rim some, dished it out a little bit, but Fletcher Lawyer, Mason Gillis, Lance Jones, none of these guys were able to get much separation to even get clean looks. They only got 7 threes up that game. And that's where the inability to rise up above UConn's guards and also the inability to get separation on ball screens. And UConn, for the most part, they're straight up with Zach Edey, so they weren't into the rotations that typically Purdue was used to seeing, where they're oftentimes taking horse shots. They just didn't get any of that last night. And
Zach Edey, just the 3rd Big Ten player to win AP Player of the Year and make the national championship game. So there's no doubt about the accomplishments of him as an individual, Purdue as a program as a whole. And not only was Purdue dominant and efficient offensively throughout the season, but defensively they were exceptional throughout the year as well. I was so impressed with UConn's offense, man. The way they moved the basketball, the consistency and the crispness of their movement and their passing. It just seemed like that took a lot of energy for Purdue to sustain trying to stick with them.
Yeah, and again, I mentioned defensively, everybody on UConn was elite. Well, offensively, there's no weak links. Everybody is a threat. They can do it from the inside. They can do it from the outside. They didn't shoot the ball particularly well, but they're getting high-quality looks every possession down. It feels like when you watch UConn, they're fighting every single possession. They value the ball every single possession. I think 2 things, the pace that they run their offense with the precision, that ball sees multiple sides of the floor. It gives it more time for that defense to break down, and anybody's a threat. Anybody can go break loose and make a play on their own. So it's beautiful basketball. What they did back-to-back is beyond remarkable, especially in this day and age. And Purdue, look, a great season. You just ended up running into a better team. I think there's many years this Purdue ball club wins a national championship, but UConn was just a better team this season and definitely last night.
And it certainly felt that way, just watching the way the game plays out. When Dan Hurley wasn't, shoving players, towards the ball or anything like that, then he was coaching at a really high level. Also, a guy like Cam Spencer, who Big Ten fans have certainly witnessed before, but you were making a comment to me even off air about the way that he can be utilized in UConn's scheme, because he's not going to be the first option on the scouting report for the opponent. But when you have someone with his versatility and experience, Purdue really struggled trying to stick with him.
There's no doubt. And Cam Spencer, he's surrounded by studs, guys that likely go in the first round of the NBA draft. Spencer will not be on the top of your scouting report. He's not who you put your best defender on, but so smart, so intelligent, so tough. He gets to the boards. He can make decisions out of ball screens. He can knock down shots about 44% from the year. So I thought a guy from Rutgers would be a nice pickup, maybe come off the bench, knock down some shots. Well, in the half court for UConn, he's a guy that kind of makes them go because he's so smart. The ball moves, and then he can make plays for himself and for teammates.
It certainly showed up last night, as it has throughout the season for UConn. So credit to them for what they were able to get done. Number 1 overall seed with very good reason. We'll have more reaction on not only last night's game, but we'll get Trent's thoughts just on the program as a whole. What we saw this season from the Boilermakers, and certainly the legacy conversation is one that's worth having. Historic season for the Boilermakers, first national title game appearance since 1969. Neither one of us were alive the last time that took place. Trent Meacham, most wins in a season in program history, most conference wins in a season in school history with 17, 6 wins versus AP top 10 teams. The only loss they had against a nationally ranked team happened to come last night in the national championship game, and Zach Edey, the first back-to-back National Player of the Year since Ralph Sampson. And we saw Andy Katz even getting to talk to Ralph Sampson a bit about his admiration for Zach Edey and what he loves about his game, and just seeing a big man doing big things out there for the Boilermakers. Anthony Herron and Trent Meacham are back here in studio. And so the season that Purdue has put together, we spent so many years now over the last few, especially talking about the success or lack thereof in the postseason. You certainly can't talk about that anymore with the Boilermakers making the national championship game. So it feels like a lot of those demons were exercised. Well, at the same time, they didn't quite get all the way over the hump like Virginia did a handful of seasons ago to actually win it all. But UConn was just sort of this juggernaut. But how would you encapsulate your view on what Purdue just accomplished?
Well, think about the defeat last year. One going down to a 16 and how they addressed that. A lot of programs, I think you see a lot of guys exit the door. Maybe leave the program. But what Matt Painter's established, the relationships, the culture, this program that he's established, they didn't blow it up. They just got better. Everybody that returned got better. Those freshman guards and Lawyer and Smith got much better. Zach Edey from National Player of the Year, he got better. Mason Gillis bought into his role off the bench. So everybody got better. They came into this season with a chip on their shoulder. It was there all year, 34 wins, 17-3 in a gauntlet of the Big Ten, another Big Ten championship. So what they did, they stayed present in the moment throughout the course of a long season, big accomplishments along the way, and then getting to the NCAA tournament and in dominating fashion, progressing through the tournament. We heard Michael DeCourcy, Robbie Hummel talk about that Tennessee game in particular. And I thought, everything almost just hinged on that game, it seemed like, in the Elite Eight. Fair or not, Zach Edey with 40 points, 16 rebounds, and as a team to get that win, get over that hump into the Final Four, just validates so many things for Purdue, a team that's been the class of the Big Ten in recent seasons. I think that's a national player. They're a national player now moving forward.
And when you look at Matt Painter, because he's been so respected in the coaching community and well-liked and all these other things, but because they hadn't consistently been able to advance deep in the NCAA tournament, it seemed like the national conversation about Matt Painter didn't necessarily have him on the pedestal with some of the other great coaches in the country. So he didn't have the national championship ring coming off of last night, but you had the national stage, and now everyone, it feels like, should be more aware of the caliber of coach that he is.
Oh, I think there's no doubt. We've known, following the Big Ten so much, how good he is, but sometimes you just got to get it done on that stage, which they did this year. And I love that Coach Painter has done it his way. He's done it recruiting his guys. He's trusted his eyes. He's developed talent in their own way. He hasn't tried to just find the most star players. He's got his guys. He's kept them. He's developed them. He's gone with a big, and he's won with a big. He won with Carson Edwards running the show a few years ago. So he can do it multiple ways. It's going to be really interesting to see how they are next year. They have some great young talent, coming in, the sophomore guards, assuming they're back, and you have some guys like Cam Heide, Miles Colvin off the bench. They have a lot to work with moving forward into next season. Yes, it will look different, but Coach Painter, he's already done it in different ways. I saw it one of his first few years when he had Etwan Moore, freshman guard, drop 20 against us in the first half. So Matt Painter's here to stay, and I think what they just did, what they accomplished this year, that's only going to help them on the recruiting scene, in the transfer portal, just on the national stage. Great fan, the fan support. I mean, they have everything you want, the culture they've established. So I'm excited to see them continue on in their winning way.
You mentioned the portal. I do wonder, with at least what we know about what returns on the roster, the majority of it is in the backcourt and on the wings. Do you feel like having guys like Foster Lawyer, or Fletcher Lawyer, and having Brayton Smith, having Miles Colvin, some of these guys who are smaller in stature, but are they the caliber of player that you feel like Purdue can build around and continue to have a championship caliber team?
Well, they've won a couple Big Ten championships. They just played in a national championship game, so there's no doubt. I think they have a lot to work with. I think Trey Kaufman-Wren is going to be a force in the low post next season. And you look at what Matt Painter did last year in the transfer portal, bringing in just one guy in Lance Jones, and identifying that guy was probably on no one's top list of transfers, but one of the most impactful players on a winning team in all the country. So he's recruited well. I think he's recruited more talent. You see Jaden Ivey now doing well in the NBA. I expect Zach Edey to have a great NBA career. So I think getting that elite talent that you need, I would say Braden Smith is right there too when you think of elite guards. So I love what they've done. I love how they've done it, and I expect them to continue to win.
when we look at the Big Ten season as a whole, and especially the NCAA tournament where the Illini end up making an Elite Eight, so they were one of the elite teams not only in the Big Ten but in the country. They lost to UConn. Northwestern lost to UConn. So the Huskies were kind of taking out the best teams in the Big Ten throughout postseason play here. But how do you view the season of men hoops on the whole from the Big Ten Conference?
Well, I think to get to the Final Four, have a team like Purdue get to the national championship game, I think that speaks to this conference. Obviously, Illinois is now, maybe they're a national player as well. You have more established programs like Michigan State, Indiana. Look, I think this Big Ten, you look at the coaching, that's where I would start with, is so good. Even guys like Fred Hoiberg, Chris Collins, those are kind of now some of the top coaches in the league on programs that weren't really maybe respected like some of these others. Now all of a sudden, they're at the top of the league. So I think moving forward, so much is changing in college athletics, right? You have the transfer portal, NIL, but Big Ten is in great shape, first and foremost because of the coaches, but then the elite institutions, so much support, so much resources. I expect the Big Ten to be just stronger moving forward.
So much talent on the way into the conference as well, certainly with the teams from the West Coast, that Pacific time zone on the way to the Big Ten. Things will only get deeper in this conference in men's and women's basketball. Well, let's transition a bit here out of the hoops conversation and talk some football because the NFL draft is just a couple of short weeks away. Jake Butt joins me in studio to break that down next. Bruce Feldman produces so much exceptional content, not only on college football, but also on how they will transition to the National Football League. This is a look at the Big Ten players in his first-round NFL mock draft that he put out for The Athletic. J.J. McCarthy, Marvin Harrison Jr., Olu Fashanu, Johnny Newton, Chop Robinson of Penn State, and Cooper DeJean from the Iowa Hawkeyes. Those are the Big Ten prospects that Bruce Feldman anticipates will be headed to the National Football League in the first round. Certainly other individuals who may end up being there, but Jake Butt with me in studio now. And Jake, you know what it's like when you're preparing for the draft and you're hoping to put yourself in the best position possible. And some of these prospects that we've just watched finishing up their Big Ten careers, they're going to get their NFL opportunities. It's hard to know exactly where they'll end up being slotted, but let's go down the list with a few of the guys and just kind of get a sense for what your thoughts are on maybe the best situations for them headed to the NFL. Let's start with Marvin Harrison Jr., the receiver out of Ohio State. There's three different prospects that folks view as maybe having that number one wide receiver potential. How do you view Marvin Harrison Jr. in that mix?
Yeah, so it's been a pretty honest discussion at this point. If it's Marvin Harrison, is it Neighbors, is it Roma Dunze from Washington? I think Marvin Harrison is the number one guy. I'll tell you why. Part of this conversation is like speed and explosion, and Malik Neighbors, blew everybody out of the water with his testing. Yeah. Of course, Marvin Harrison didn't run, and that was a point of contention. Like, man, what is he trying to hide anything? I just want to bring something up here. When you're playing, you get the GPS in your pads. We know Marvin can run 22, 23 miles an hour on the field. So I don't care what he looks like in underwear. The other piece of this is I do believe Malik Neighbors is a better route runner and a better separator than Marvin. But Marvin is plenty good enough to succeed at the next level. Why I have him at number one is his hands and his contested catching and his body control is about as good as I've seen since I was born in 1995. It's seriously remarkable. And why that translates to the NFL is everybody's fast. Malik Neighbors, you're fast, so is everybody. Yeah. So the windows get tighter. The gaps are smaller. It's more physical. You're going to take more shots. If you're like Marvin Harrison Jr. and when the ball touches your hands, you're coming down with it, that translates Sunday, Monday, Thursday, whenever, wherever, that translates. So I know it's been a lot of speculation at this point where he goes, and Bruce, he proposed the Vikings trade up to 4 with the Cardinals. The Cardinals need a wide receiver. And he is a generational guy for Kyler Murray. You can plug him as your X receiver right now, and he would be a difference maker. He will not get outside of the top 5, but you're looking at a guy that's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver as a rookie and throughout his entire career. He's that good. He's that polished.
I feel like there's a case you could try to make for Malik Neighbors, for Roma Dunze, like you're talking about. I mean, they're both exceptional as well. Marvin Harrison Jr. seems to me like the most can't miss out of any of those three guys. And it's interesting because his family lineage, where he's obviously got a Hall of Fame dad in Marvin Harrison Sr., but I think Marvin Harrison Jr. maybe comps more favorably to another former Arizona Cardinal in Larry Fitzgerald.
Yes.
With the size, the frame, the smoothness and the purity of his route running in his hands and everything else. But how much does the family lineage end up factoring in to your evaluation and just feeling like, yeah, we're confident of what he can become?
Well, really what I think I place value on is that he's already a pro. People were questioning his competitiveness because he didn't test. And yet I look at it and I know from a fact, talking to Ryan Day and the coaching staff, that when other guys are going out and partying on Friday night and Saturday night and having some fun, Marvin would be in the building, in the Woody, catching jugs at midnight.
Yeah, right.
First guy out to practice, last guy to leave. I mean, he's a legitimate professional. And when you're going to hand a guy $20, $25 million, you want to know that that's not going to get to his head, that he loves the craft, he loves the process. We have the evidence to say that that's who Marvin is. He will be not a distraction. He's a high character guy. I also think, to your point, when you're looking at these other receivers, Malik Neighbors played alongside Brian Thomas Jr. Both first rounders, right? Washington was loaded at receiver and at quarterback. Right. Emeka Egbuka's a stud, but he was hurt and he didn't produce last year. So every game Ohio State was on the field, the entire opposing sideline knew they had to take away Marvin Harrison Jr., and he still produced. He caught it in single, double, triple coverage. Again, you can get a glimpse into seeing this guy that is already a rare talent that will immediately translate to Sundays in the NFL.
So I'm really curious to get your thoughts on J.J. McCarthy because, the conversation about J.J. and scouts I've been talking to for months about McCarthy have been saying for a while now that he's got top 10 pick potential, maybe top 5 pick potential. I got to be honest, I'm a little concerned with if JJ goes in the top 5 that he'll be rushed onto the field in certain situations because the talent, the aptitude, the acumen, everything on the field and off looks like it's got star potential, but I do feel like there's still some meat on the bone for his development to be ready as a day one kind of guy. How do you view JJ as a draft prospect?
I think those are fair things, and I think a lot of that opinion is based on the production at Michigan, right? And certainly, Caleb Williams and Michael Penix and Drake May, right? Those guys were producing big-time stats. Yeah. But stats in college football lie to us because what we know about Michigan is they blew out half their opponents this year, and JJ's not throwing in the fourth quarter, let alone playing in the fourth quarter. So you start to watch the tape and you say, you want to, put a circle around his potential. What is he capable of? He's capable of all the things that every other quarterback in this draft has shown. He may just not have the volume of sexy highlight plays. What I like about him, though, is playing in a pro-style system at Michigan. Going to the NFL, you come back to your fundamentals. Drake May makes some awesome plays running outside of the pocket. Those DNs are going to catch you at the next level, right? Whereas JJ, you look at Michigan, and he played within the system. People say system quarterback as if it's a negative. Well, in the NFL, in the first quarter on early downs, hit that check down. Right. Hit that underneath. And then feel the defense and then rip it over top. And I thought that that's what you saw this year, and you see a clear progression in his growth. Another thing of this is when you're going to be drafted in the top 5 and the top 10, you're hailed as the savior. Caleb Williams is the savior of the Chicago Bears right now. We already agree. That standard is astronomically high. I played at Michigan. I played with a number of guys who were hailed as the savior of Michigan football. That's a lot of weight that not everyone can carry. That was true for JJ when he was a junior in high school going to Michigan, right? And yet somehow he exceeded expectations. I talked to a scout that was talking about how, his character, he never has a bad day. And when you're the quarterback, you are the leader of the team, the locker room, and the franchise. It's important. I believe JJ can carry that weight. I believe he'll be a leader. I think his competitiveness in football IQ are going to allow him to grasp an NFL playbook. So yes, there will be development. That'll be true for all of these guys. But if it's true that he's being mocked to the Minnesota Vikings, that may be the best situation of any quarterback taken in the first round. So I think he could benefit from that situation as well.
Yeah, right. The Vikings, you'll have a veteran quarterback who's there, but not someone who's an incumbent starter with the Vikings. Great offensive mind on the coaching staff. So could be a great spot where Bruce Feldman has him mocked. Let's go to the line of scrimmage, though, especially in the offensive line out of State College. Olu Fashanu, a guy with all kinds of physical traits for the tackle position, could have come out into the draft a season ago. came back for one more year at Penn State and was exceptional again for the Nittany Lions. May, not definitively, but may end up being the top offensive tackle off the board this year.
The tackle class this year is loaded.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, we could see 5, 6, 7 guys taken in the first round. That's how deep this is. And you look at it, you got Joe Alt from Notre Dame. I believe that's going to be the first tackle. You got Fuaga from Oregon State. You got Faatuna from Washington. Out of all these guys, Olu Fashanu has the highest ceiling. In terms of just pure excitement and potential, length, quickness, he's got the highest ceiling.
Yeah.
But there is areas where he can improve, and I think namely that's going to have to do with his physicality in the run game. Some of these other guys are more physical, more angry, more polished when it comes to that. But what you like about Olu Fashanu is you can plug him in at left tackle day one, and your quarterback's going to be safe sitting there in the pocket. Highest ceiling of these guys. Will he go first, second, third? It remains to be seen. But you absolutely are spending a first-round pick on Fashanu.
Well, let's talk about one of his teammates as well and get a defender into the conversation here, where Chop Robinson is a guy who showed out at the Combine. And none of us who watched his college career at Penn State were surprised at the blazing 40 time, the great 10-yard start and everything that he brought to the table. And it is a draft where it's not looked at having a generational edge rusher, but Chop Robinson is one of these guys talked about with the potential for coming off the board early.
He's got generational potential. When you run a 4.4 off the edge and see his first step, like that is generational. Seriously, he's that explosive. But I think it's a double-edged sword where he at times was too reliant on that speed rush. And at the NFL, good tackles, they can defend one move, but it's like a boxer. You got to have a nice punch, and then the counter punch is going to be what separates you. So he's got a great foundation. He can beat you with the speed. But the key for him, kind of similar to Fashanu, is going to be to develop that bag of pass rush moves. Yeah. The concern is the production this year. He had 4 sacks, 2 of which came against UMass. You may say, why is that the case? But then you look at the guy perform, you turn on the tape, and you say, this is a freak athlete. With the right coaching and the right scheme and the right system, he can develop into something special. When you run a 4.4, heads are going to pop up and say, man, we got to get this guy on our team.
And especially you factor in that Manny Diaz defense, everybody was making plays. Everybody was eating in the opposing backfield. So sometimes Chop Robinson is there to make a play, but he's got some teammate who's beating him to the
Someone's sacking the quarterback in about a second and a half.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Sorry, Chop, man. You couldn't quite get there that fast.
There's no
right?
doubt about that. Well, between the now and the weeks we have leading up to the draft, you and I definitely got to continue having this conversation because there's a lot to discuss with the NFL draft prospects coming out of the Big Ten Conference. But there's also a lot to talk about with spring football here. Some of these quarterbacks like we're looking at right there who are no longer in the Big Ten Conference, leaving jobs open. What does that look like? What's going to happen? We'll discuss it with Jake Butt next here on Big Ten Today. There were some exceptional passers in the Big Ten Conference last season. There's no doubt about that. Look at the way Talia Tagovailoa and even Kyle McCord did light things up at different points. We were just talking about J.J. McCarthy here on the air a few moments ago. We know Drew Aller returns to State College. Hudson Card will be back in West Life as well. But as we look at this spring season coming up here, there are a lot of quarterback battles that will be playing out. Jobs that feel like they are open behind center around the Big Ten. And so since spring football is going to be on our airwaves this weekend, we figure it's a great opportunity with Jake in studio with me to try to talk through a few of these quarterback battles that will be playing out. And there's a lot of them that are pretty juicy, like I talked about in the open of the show. Why not go to your alma mater where the quarterback position in Michigan has really several years of high-level play with several Big Ten championships, now a national championship. And so it is a hot seat like you were just talking about a few minutes ago. And at the moment, we don't know with Alex Orji and Jaden Denegal, Jaden Davis, Jack Tuttle. There's a lot of guys who feel like they could be in the mix. How do you see that maybe shaking out?
I don't know. I don't know. I am waiting to see it. Really, this will be a theme. You want someone to separate. You know what I mean? You want someone to seize this. And that's what Michigan's waiting for right now. But I think for Sharon Moore, he's in an interesting position because you do, as a head coach, you got to think about today, but you also have to think about tomorrow. You got to think about the future of the program. And I say that because, Michigan's in a unique place where I know they're excited about Jaden Davis as a freshman. What can he be one day? But as you look at it for Michigan, you start to look at the roster, and it reminds me of that 2021 season where I expect the O-line to be great once again. I think Colston Loveland is one of the best weapons, certainly the best tight end in college football. Yeah. The running back room is loaded once again. So what's their identity going to be? they're going to run the football and they're going to play great defense. So, Jack Tuttle reminds me of a Cade McNamara. Maybe not the upside of an Orji or a Denegal or Davis, but can he play within the system to help them maximize their chances to winning? I do believe if you're Sharon Moore, you want one of these, higher upside guys to separate. With Alex Orji, you continue to hear about how explosive he is in running the football. What I want to start to see
Saw a
is
little
the
bit of that
headline.
on display at different points too, right?
And it looked great.
Yeah.
And there may be packages for him regardless of who the quarterback is, but I think if you're a Michigan fan, what you want to see the headline is saying Alex Orji is blowing people away with his accuracy and his decision making. I know Jim Harbaugh liked Denegal last year too, but this is going to be a process that's drawn out throughout the summer, throughout fall camp, maybe early part of their season. But remember, they've had an easy front-loaded schedule. Now they got Texas early in their schedule. So you want this to figure out as soon as possible. I don't think any decisions will be made through spring ball, though.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a start for Sharon Moore with the schedule and with the QB battle and everything else. We'll see. Since it's his first time with the big whistle, he may go the vet move and say, you know what, we're not going to let anyone know who's starting at QB until they actually run out there off the sideline for the first time. Well, we do know in Columbus, there are big shoes to fill there as well, just for what the quarterback position has meant in Columbus to the Ohio State University. And Kyle McCord put up good numbers last year. The standard is just so high for the Buckeyes at quarterback right now. And so Will Howard, Devin Brown, Aaron Nolan, Julian Sayin, there's a lot of guys with big accolades, but Howard is the guy with the most experience.
And again, it's a similar situation where if you're Ryan Day, you want one of these guys to separate and you want to seize it. But for Ohio State, you absolutely have to acknowledge the fact that this is one of the best rosters in college football, that they feel they can make a national championship run this year. But they got to beat their rival Michigan, and they got to win when they get to the playoffs. The conference is going to be loaded. I'd put them in that top tier in terms of rosters with Oregon, but as we'll talk about in a second, Oregon has Dylan Gabriel. He's the best quarterback in the conference. Who is going to separate? Who is going to fit Ryan Day's vision of what he wants this offense to be this fall? Well, as always is true, the weapons are loaded. You got a deep running back room, but Will Howard has the experience. I like the fact that he's mobile. He reminds me of what a JT Barrett was back then, where he can get you yards in a bunch of different ways. But, Julian Sayin, their freshman, he lost the black stripe very early in spring. They're basically saying you're officially a Buckeye. I know they're excited about him as well. And don't forget about Devin Brown. I think part of this is going to come down to that fit and that vision for what Ryan Day wants this offense to be. That'll be the deciding factor.
Quickly before we move on, I'm curious about having Chip Kelly there. It just feels intriguing for him. UCLA was already entering the Big Ten, so we were going to have Chip Kelly as a head coach. Now we got him as an offensive coordinator, back to specializing and really what separated him from the pack in college football. How do you think that factors in just with the QB battle and having that Chip Kelly ingredient in it?
Well, when you think about it, it may help some of the younger guys because now they're all learning this new system and this new verbiage at once. But what I think gets lost is Chip Kelly has actually put together some really solid run games too in terms of yards per carry. I think if you're Ohio State, you want to continue to lean on this run game, especially you don't have C.J. Stroud under center this year. The defense is going to be improved and loaded once again. So I think what you consider here is which guy can be fundamentally sound, avoid the big mistakes, and complement the run game. They all have the talent to complete the ball over top and make the sexy highlight plays, but I think they're going to prioritize which guy gives us the best chance to win on any given week.
Well, you mentioned the Oregon Ducks have the presumed best quarterback in the Big Ten Conference, as Dylan Gabriel was a Heisman Trophy contender at different points throughout his time at Oklahoma. So now he's on his way to Eugene. He will likely be the starting quarterback for the Ducks, but Dante Moore is right there. He was a very high-level recruit when he came in as well and went to UCLA initially.
Best quarterback room in the conference right now, best quarterback in the conference in Dylan Gabriel. They got their guy for now, and then they got their guy in the former five-star Dante Moore for the future. What I love about this is, roster to roster, the conversation is Ohio State and Oregon have the two best rosters right now in the Big Ten. That's the common consensus. But Dylan Gabriel's the quarterback to be the difference maker for him. Loaded at offensive line, the weapons all over the place. But then you start to talk about the fit in the system. And I want to use Bo Nix as an example. Bo Nix, in his time at Auburn, averaged 58% completion percentage. you're not going to talk about a first-round draft pick if that's what you're throwing. And his last year at Oregon, 77%. So that's coaching, that's fit, that's system. As good as Dylan Gabriel has been, I imagine he'll be even more improved here in this Oregon Duck system.
Certainly seems that way. We know there's talent, and we know that Dan Lanning, he did not come to the Big Ten to take part. He came to take over. Big goals there in Eugene on the football field, and that quarterback room is deep as any in the entire country. Nebraska on the field for practice in Matt Rule's second spring football season, getting ready to take the field and make sure that everyone knows they're going to be a contender again. No more Big Ten West, but the Big Ten Conference as a whole, as it expands, Nebraska hoping they will be even more competitive on the field of play. And they're not the only ones who have taken the practice field for spring football. But let's start off with the second season for Matt Rule in Nebraska being out there again because, we were talking about the quarterback meeting rooms here. He's got a very interesting one in Lincoln as well.
I believe Nebraska is the most interesting team going into this Big Ten season because you look at the record and certainly 5-7 isn't good enough, right? That's not good enough for Matt Rule. That's not good enough for the Cornhusker fans. But then you start to peel back the layers and you say, man, Tony White had that defense significantly improved. Right. 9 of their 12 games last year, they held opponents to under 20 points per game. You can win a lot of games with your defense playing like that. I think the defense is going to be good. And now you bring in Dylan Raiola. Will he be the quarterback or not? I think that's, of course, going to be the headline. But when you think about this quarterback battle, the way I'm looking at this, it's not about what these guys are going to add. It's about removing those mistakes. They've been one of the worst football teams in terms of giving the ball away and turnover margin. That is the number one statistic to winning or losing. So you got a freshman quarterback that you want to seize the number one spot, but he's got to avoid making those freshman mistakes. That'll be the biggest difference for Nebraska.
Well, let's talk about Luke Fickell. His second year then in Madison with the Badgers, expectations always high. And so in year two, you would imagine Wisconsin fans will expect an even better product on the field.
It should be. Context matters. It's a complete overhaul of their systems last year, right? You go from 22, 23 personnel, fullbacks, tight ends, to more of an air raid system. It was good, not great, sometimes, average at times. So can you make that jump here in year two? You'd expect it. You go from a 3-4 defensive scheme to a more 3-3-5, kind of what they ran at Cincinnati. Would you expect a jump in year two? I absolutely do, and I think Fickell's a phenomenal coach. I'll give him some credit there in year one. It's tough to overhaul your roster and your system, but you would love to see a jump here in year two.
I'd say in West Lafayette, maybe some of the peaks of Purdue were really high. Some of the valleys were kind of low for Ryan Walters also. So you'd imagine he's going to look for more consistency from his team in year two.
And that's what he said in some of his spring practice pressers is he's like, man, we were hot and cold at times. The defense was good, and then occasionally they just give up these big plays that would just kill them. It's tough to overcome. And you look at the offensive side of the football, we were so excited to see Hudson Card. And yet he got beat up. He's injured. He took a number of hits last season. Well, he's put on about 20 pounds. He's bigger. He's stronger. The O-line should be revamped. Another thing to point out here, Anthony, this time last year they had about 60 guys, scholarship guys on their roster. They couldn't even do a traditional spring game. Think about that. Year one, that's tough to overcome. Now they're at that 100, 102 spot, I believe, of scholarship players. So once again, you start to see this jump. I'm really excited for Ryan Walters, again, installing his system. Excited to see Hudson Card with this new added weight. They're a team just to keep an eye on here in the Big Ten Conference. If Ryan Walters can get that defense playing how he did at Illinois, they'll be a competitor.
There's no doubt about that, man. An aggressive style schematically on each side of the ball. And then having a year under your belt going into the spring for Purdue, for Ryan Walters, that young, energetic coaching staff. A lot of expectations in West Lafayette with good reason. A lot of expectations for all those second-year head coaches for what they're going to do. Looking forward to talking about that as they all take the field this coming weekend. As it relates to today's show, my thanks to Jake Butts, to Trent Meacham. I'm Anthony Herron, and this has been Big Ten Today.